back to the MindCep Podcast. As your host, Alex Muir, helping you flex your mind, body, and soul. In today's episode 75, we're going to be speaking with repeat guest, Kimberly Spencer. Kimberly Spencer is an award-winning high-performance, trauma-informed coach and trainer, Amazon best-selling author, TEDx speaker, and the founder of crownyourself.com, helping visionary leaders transform their self-limiting stories, build their empire, stand out fearlessly, and make the income and the impact they deserve. From her entrepreneurial beginnings at 5 selling bags of glitter water to her neighbors, to becoming an award-winning screenwriter, certified Pilates instructor, Miss Congeniality, and 6 times WeGo Health Activist Award nominee, Kimberly is proof that it's better to make your own mold than to conform to someone else's. She's also the former executive of a national e-commerce startup and was the owner of the private Pilates studio, Fitness with Kim, in Los Angeles, California. Her work has been featured on Netflix, The CW, ESPN, Chicken Soup for the Soul, NPR, and in Thrive Global, CNBC, and Forbes. And please welcome back repeat guest, Kimberly Spencer, to the podcast. And this episode is brought to you by RadioGuestList.com, the #1 free radio guest, podcast, and talk show guest expert interview booking service on the internet. This episode is brought to you by PodcastGuest.com, connecting podcasters with great guests. Podcasters. Find relevant experts and other podcasters to be guests on your podcast. Experts, guests, and more. Get booked on great podcasts to expand your reach and audience. PodcastGuest.com connects podcasters with experts, authors, and other podcasters to be guests on their podcasts. Disclaimer. All information provided by Alex Muir is of general nature and is spoken from Alex Muir's and his guests' personal experiences and personal opinions on the topics related to fitness, health, and education only. No information is to be taken as medical or other health advice pertaining to any specific health or medical condition. You agree that use of this information is at your own risk and hold Alex Muir harmless from any and all losses, liabilities, injuries, or damages resulting from any and all claims. Record right now. And we're live. Welcome back to the MindCep Podcast. This is your host, Alex Muir, helping you flex your mind, body, and soul. And today we're having another repeat guest, Kimberly Spencer. Kimberly, welcome back to the show for part 2 of our podcast series. And happy to have you back on the show. And how have you been?
I am so excited. I literally got so excited for coming back. I did a little happy dance and slid almost out of my chair. So that thud you heard in the background, that was me.
Right on. And Kimberly, I had such a great discussion with you on our last episode. And I was looking back, we spoke last on September of last
right
year.
after my birthday.
Yeah. And we had a great episode. We covered lots of ground. We covered, trying to improve our mindset. We covered, talked a little bit about branding, how we should, when people have their brand or they're still working on their brand, but they want to come up with a product or service, to do it before you're ready, dive right into it, to experiment, because it helps develop those entrepreneurial muscles. So I wanted to start off by saying, has there been any change in the way that you view personal branding since we last spoke? Because I know you're really big into the podcasting space and helping entrepreneurs and podcasters all, find each other and connect. So has your approach to personal branding evolved since then? And what advice?
Since our interview, I went and launched a whole second business.
Right on.
So a whole second business all around revolutionizing the guesting industry and making it a really great place for podcasters, guests, and the alignment of that to support each other, and the building of the Communication Queens brand and the Communication Queens agency in conjunction with the Crown Yourself brand, which is my coaching company, along with my own personal brand. All of these pieces, they're all separate brands that all stem from me, but it all comes from an understanding and an awareness of my own personal brand and the impact that each brand has. So there is, when it comes to branding, the biggest thing that's deepened, it's not necessarily new for me, but it's deepened, it's congruence. Right. Because we need to have congruence between not only our brand and who we're projecting out there, who the world perceives us to be, or who we're trying to be perceived as, and who we actually are at our core, which means thus that we also need to have the conscious mind, unconscious mind congruence, meaning our conscious goals are in congruence with our unconscious mind and what that is saying in the communication between those two. So it's all an inside job, and the brand is never pulled from external factors. And I think that in creating a whole nother brand really was, what were the concepts and what were the things inside of me that I wanted to bring out into a whole new level and highlight those in the business. And ultimately, those come down to your core values. Now, we have personal core values. I mean, freedom is one of my top 5 personal core values. So is health. But health is not in my core values for my Crown Yourself business, nor is it in the core values for my Communication Queens business. But generosity is. Generosity, that is one of the core values that we're building our Communication Queens agency on, where I was so excited to be in a conversation with a large podcast production company yesterday. And we were talking about getting some of our clients onto their podcast because they have many podcasts. And it was a really wonderful relationship to be building. And they're like, okay, well, tell me about like what you do differently than other agencies. And I said, oh yeah, well, we leverage AI in multiple factors, but we also produce marketing deliverables for our clients so that our clients can easily promote the podcast that they're on. And they're like, wait, the podcaster isn't necessarily... Not all podcasts are created equal, and not all podcasts will provide deliverables. And sometimes the max that a podcast will provide maybe is like a Canva image. But honestly, having been in the game of online marketing for over 7 years now, it changes and evolves. And the engagement that you'll get from having something like a video reel is so much more powerful, or a headliner audiogram is so much more powerful. And I'd much rather, instead of wasting time, I'm all about building efficiency into anything that I do. Yeah. And so much rather give my clients an audiogram or a headline or video clip of their podcast so that they are able to leverage that and get their influence out there in a major way, rather than having it be bypassed over not only by the algorithm, but by other people. Yeah. Because people see, like, what do you do when you see a lovely Canva image of a podcast? It's like, unless you know the person, you're scrolling right past it. Yeah. So we provide marketing deliverables. We provide the content, the copy, the newsletter copy, so that our clients can just promote the episode. And this podcast agency was like, I get pitched by 30 to 40 agencies a day, and I've never heard of a single one of them doing that. And that's because we have the core value of generosity. Yeah. Yeah. And it all stems from that core value, because I know how hard podcasters work. I know how hard you're working to get this episode out. And we are each donating our time. And then on the podcaster side, they're donating all their time of the editing and the marketing and creating of their own marketing materials. So why not have some tools and some deliverables for our clients? It just made sense to me. But it all came from understanding, when you have a brand, what are the core values of that brand? And then those core values will create the product and service differentiators. Right. Yeah. And I love how you talk about core values, because like, I know what like my core values are. Generosity is definitely a big one as well. I love like a big theme, and myself in your podcast, on our last podcast, was reciprocity, like finding a way for everyone to win. And I'm really a big proponent of that. And I love like helping people any way I can, even if it's something small, right? Like I had a few guests that I had on my podcast. They sent me a thank you letter for being on, because then I went on their podcast, and it was such a great experience. I'm starting to do that now, because that's something that we spoke about as well, is like, find a way to guest on other people's podcasts. It's a great way to grow. It's a great way to develop additional relationships. And I've done that. And I've already been on 2 in the last couple of weeks. And it's such a fun experience. And I want to keep going on again. And huzzah. Yeah. That's amazing, Alex. Yeah. And it's because podcast audiences, they listen to podcasts. Yes. And they're also learners. Yep. So for authors to go on podcasts, it can blow up your book. One of my favorite examples is from my mentor, Brendan Bouchard. He and Tony Robbins' book, his book, The Motivation Manifesto, and Tony Robbins' book, Money Master the Game, back in 2008, came out at the same time. And Brendan said from stage, and this is obviously hearsay, but this is what he said from stage. He said they were both on the New York Times bestseller list.
Yeah.
And then Tony, being Tony Robbins and like what he does, did 600 podcast episodes, even with like small audiences, to get that book out there into as many hands as possible. Podcast audiences are learners. And so if you provide some sort of service and value that people can learn from, and especially your story, like ultimately any brand is really connected to the story behind it. And people connect far more to a story than to your strategies. So, I mean, I've talked about ownership and personal responsibility, and you can say those things and it sounds like, oh yeah, okay, kind of, I like you kind of get the response like, I know this. But when I say, I struggled with a 10-year battle with bulimia, and it wasn't until I started taking ownership that it was never my dad who I blamed because of the multiple childhood experiences that I had adversely with him growing up because he was an addict. It wasn't when I took responsibility and realized it was never my father shoving my finger down my throat. That was me. That was my choice to do that to my body, to harm myself. That was where I actually had the agency to start changing. But it hits so much more differently in the form, like just feel the difference in your body. Like, did that create more of a picture for you of what ownership actually is versus like, you should take ownership. Ownership is the first principle to having and mastering your mind. Like when humans have connected through stories since the dawn of time. And if you know how to share your core values and your core strategies and processes that you provide in your business in the form of a story, whether it's your story or your client success stories, that is how you build that know, like, and trust factor very quickly, and you create influence and engagement with other people because we are wired for story. Like literally saying the phrase, "Can I tell you a story? Can I tell you a story?"
Yeah, absolutely.
I was sitting in my Abundance 360 mastermind that I'm a part of, that is Peter Diamandis' mastermind. And Kyle, I forget his last name, he's the president of Singularity University. And he said, "Can I tell you a story?" And we all kind of leaned in. And he said, "You are welcome for that mini dopamine hit. And by the way, just that one phrase converts short-term learning into long-term learning, because now you're going to remember this."
Just by saying, "Let me tell you a story," or "Do you mind if I tell you a story?"
Can I tell you? And you also, on a communication and influence level, subconsciously, you get buy-in from the audience to hear that story, because typically they're going to give you permission. And even if they're like, okay, that's most often, it's called pre-framing in communication. And this is something that I teach to all of my clients, is whether they're coaching or in leadership or going on podcast interviews, when you pre-frame something, you will get someone's permission. So especially in like a coaching conversation, if I am coaching someone and I'm going to say something that's going to challenge a deep-seated belief system, and I say, "Do I have your permission to say something that's going to make you want to punch me in the face?" And they will be like, "Yeah."
They want to know more. They want to know more. Yeah.
It bypasses the cognitive bias and the cognitive dissonance to allowing them to actually receive the information. So by framing it in the form of a question, you actually get buy-in from the audience. And because you're framing it in the form of a story, it also is in NLP. There's something called metaphors. We learn from metaphors all the time. And there was a great hypnotherapist, Milton Erickson, who his clients would come to him for weight loss. And this one client came to him and he was like, "I don't know what he did in the session, but he started to lose weight immediately after." And he goes, "I have no idea what he did. He just started talking about his tomato plants. Like, I have no idea what he did." But what Milton Erickson did, who was a great hypnotherapist, he started using the metaphor of a tomato plant and how a tomato plant just knows how much water it is to consume and how much nutrients it needs to consume. And it knows when to not consume. And it knows how to receive the exact amount of water that it needs to have and then how not to. And he would go into this metaphor for for a decent amount of time, embedding the commands of subconsciously bypassing the cognitive dissonance of being able, where the metaphor correlated to a human being able to just know how much food their body needs to consume, and how a tomato would just know when it's full and when it needed to stop consuming and when it needed to digest and start allowing what it consumed to create the nutrients for the plant to grow into a healthy, strong and tomato plant. And so that is the power of story and metaphor, because our subconscious minds take everything personally. So when you hear a story of someone else overcome a challenge, a difficulty, even if you're not exactly facing that exact same challenge, if it's a well-crafted story, you can picture yourself in that experience, overcoming it. And thus unconsciously, you're overcoming an obstacle in your own mind as they are going along with the story, giving you proof and more proof, because our unconscious minds always need proof of that we can do it. It gives you more proof that you can do it too. And that's why my favorite saying is, whenever I hear a story of someone doing something incredible, whether it's climbing Mount Everest to, scaling their business to multi-billions of dollars, or starting a startup that like changes the world, I always say, if he can, I can too. If she can, I can too. And here's my thing that revolutionized my own mindset years ago. I did this at a mastermind, and it was Grace Lever's mastermind. And they were acknowledging all of the women who did something extraordinary. It was back in 2018. And everything, even if it was a goal that I had already achieved, I wrote it down and I said, if she can do this, I can too. And then what happened is that my mind saw the goals that I'd already achieved. And then it also saw the goals that I hadn't yet achieved. And it started to make those connections of, I had a whole list of things achieved and not achieved. And suddenly there was a whole list of possibility of, if she can, I can too. And then I was like, oh, I've already done that. That's extra proof. So it's not basing our unconscious mind and our alignment based on faith, even though faith is a part of it. But if you can just stack your proof, you can do and figure it out, you can overcome literally any challenge. I have ingrained that belief so deeply. Not in the belief of like, I know how to do everything, because I don't. But I know that if you give me enough time, energy, and resources, I can figure anything out if I want to.
I love that. Because that's been my motivational, like inner speech statement, or like that one statement. If he can do it, I can do it. If she can do it, I can do it. And it's so motivating. Like, and it's not, maybe it's not even motivating. I've just been saying it over and over again when I'm at work and stuff, because I'm fairly new to the insurance industry. I have all my experiences in banking, but I'm fairly new to insurance. But my mindset has been, well, if they can do it, I can do it. And because there's still people that I'm working with that made a 180 shift as well, from like healthcare to insurance, or from, very different industries, right? Not the same industries, but they've been learning too. They've been adapting too. And I'm like, if they can do it, I can do it. And I just have to trust the process, trust myself, and that I'll figure it out. So it's like, I don't know what shift has happened, but I'm still, I still have my moments where I'm scared, right? Because it's very different, and I know I got a lot to learn, but I'm not letting that stop me moving forward.
Absolutely. And I think the other piece is when you can look at what skill sets are transferable. So, for example, I have a client right now who is transferring out of one industry and going completely into a different one. And the greatest shift that was made is when we looked at every single skill set that she had from another industry. And she's like, oh my gosh, she goes, I can literally go into any industry, not just like some, but I said, you have a skill set of sales, communication, influence, persuasion, team leading. All of these skill sets are transferable literally into any job position. It's our egos that keep us boxed in to this, like, oh, this is only for this industry. Like I work with a lot of clients in entertainment, and I've had several times bump up against the belief system of like, oh, well, I love working with creative people. I'm like, I've been in the entertainment industry. I was a screenwriter. I then transferred into e-commerce. That's just as creative. Trust me, you can get very creative with funding, with brand storytelling, with the storytelling of the product and customer success stories. Like there's a lot of creativity that goes into that. There's creativity. I've worked with clients in construction industries. There's creativity that goes into the storytelling around the brand. It's all storytelling.
Yeah.
All of it. You look at the most successful brands in history, they have leveraged successfully storytelling and what that means. Like you would just even watch like a small commercial, like a commercial that just really resonates with your heart. If you watch any of the Super Bowl commercials, there is a 30-second snippet of what storytelling looks like for a multi-billion-dollar company.
And they're so good at storytelling. There's always a story behind every ad, right? Mm-hmm. And then you don't find out. I mean, you watch it, and then a lot of times you don't find out to the very end because sometimes there's like a twist, right? And then it's never about the product. It's always about the story, especially with car commercials. Because sometimes I've watched a car commercial, I'm like, wait, what? This is about a car? I'm like, no, it's not about a car. It's about the feeling that you get during the journey of buying the car.
Exactly, and that is where the transformation is, because most people, whether for any goal, like that is done very meticulously. Yeah. And strategically, like that is not a mistake that they do that. Then suddenly it's like, oh my gosh, this is about a car commercial, because they hooked you with the story. Yeah. And there's a reason, there's in the psychology of advertising, story allows you to connect on a deeper level, because it is never, you said it so perfectly, Alex. And I actually wrote about this in my book that's coming out this year called Rule Your Body, about my ability to overcome bulimia with no psychological or medical intervention after 10 years of struggle. And it came from this one piece of information that I realized was that it was never about the goal weight. It was never about the number. It was about what I made the number mean for me. Right. What I thought that number, being at what X amount of weight, would make me feel on a daily basis. I thought that being, what was it, like 115 pounds back then, would make me feel happy and joyous and amazing. And that's such crap. Like, it's never about the number. And I found the same thing because I made the same mistake in business. When I first got started, I thought that, if I have a 6-figure year, then that'll be the thing, or a 7-figure year. And I thought, then that's the thing. And I made the goal about achieving this big number. Yeah. Or what I thought was big at the time. And the reality of it was the feeling of what I thought that number would create for me and do for me. So like the big thing in the coaching industry is hitting your first 10K month. And when I did that in 2018, like my body, my nervous system actually wasn't regulated to sustain that amount of energy. Like I did it and it was great. And then suddenly all my belief systems of like, oh my gosh, you actually did it, came flooding in. And my nervous system hadn't adapted to regulate at that level, at that new, what I call energetic set point. So we have a set point with our weight. We also have a set point with money. That's why there may be a certain amount in your bank account that you won't let drop. Like where it just doesn't drop below, but you get what you tolerate, as Tony Robbins says. Yeah. So being able to see, okay, what is the floor that I'm tolerating? And just like with weight, there's like a 5 to maybe 10 pound range that you may vacillate within, but it's not like it takes a lot to shift, like a big, massive shift to change the weight to a different weight. Yeah. So if you think about it from this form of money as well, money is the same way. It's a form of energy. Food is a form of energy. They're very, very similar. And so when I started applying the strategies that led to my successfully overcoming bulimia, that's what led me to getting out of nearly 100K in debt. And
holy.
Yeah.
Incredible.
And transforming my business, doubling in 2020, growing at 35% still in 2021. And that's with having a baby and losing my father, and then ending up manifesting our dream home a year later. Wow. Like bananas is the transformation that can occur, but it came from understanding what the feeling was that I thought whatever X amount of goal would allow me to feel, and then starting to practice the embodiment of that feeling on a daily basis, on a regular basis, rather than waiting for the goal to have the feeling. Because otherwise you're just going to be chasing a feeling and it's going to be futile. Like it's going to be, the journey's going to suck. Yeah. But it really isn't about the journeying process and in the embodying process of learning to love and accept where you are and start generating the emotions and the energy, because emotions is energy in motion,
Yeah.
generating the energy that's at that level financially or weight goal, whatever type of goal it is, generating whatever energy you believe that by achieving that goal you will have, practice in generating that energy now rather than waiting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I also saw that you're a certified hypnotherapist, right? Because you
Mm-hmm.
and NLP. Did you use that the hypnotherapy or the neurolinguistic programming to help you overcome your bulimia?
No, I didn't even know. I didn't know any of that until years later. Um, Actually, looking back, a lot of the processes that I put into place, they are NLP. They are subconscious mind shifts.
Yeah.
I just was doing trial and error and pure exploration and curiosity. And I was also simultaneously regulating my nervous system physiologically through Pilates, because
Right.
I wasn't focusing on doing a lot of hardcore sympathetic activating exercises. I was focusing on Pilates, yoga, and Qigong. Those are the three forms of exercise that really activate the parasympathetic nervous system, because they pull in the
Well, in
rest.
it,
And yeah,
right.
they leverage breathing, where you're exhaling longer than you inhale. And from that, you're actually allowing your nervous system to regulate. And from my childhood, I didn't grow up in a very emotionally regulated environment at all. Like my mother didn't like to deal with feelings. They aren't practical or pragmatic. My dad practiced classic escapism as an addict. And so feelings were seen as manipulative. And so I am a very emotional human being. I
Yeah.
am very empathetic. I feel other people's feelings, and I feel when they're suppressing them as well.
Yeah.
And I would take that on. And so basically, my bulimia was me shoving down my emotions, and then eventually they would just like a volcano purge out of me. And my bulimia was the physical manifestation of that. So healing my bulimia started first with me taking ownership, which is a presupposition actually of NLP. It's putting the client at cause, having them see themselves in the cause position rather than at the effect position. Because once you start seeing yourself as the cause of everything that you create in life, then that actually allows you to take ownership and agency. Now, let me be clear, ownership is not self-blame.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean like, oh my gosh, I caused this, I'm in charge or at cause for other people's behavior. No, they're at cause for their own behavior. That's your boundary. You're only allowed to take 100% of your responsibility. So my 100% of responsibility that I had to take for recovering from bulimia was I chose to stick my finger down my throat. My father chose to be emotionally, sometimes verbally and sometimes sexually abusive to me during my childhood. Those were his choices. Those were not my fault.
Yeah.
That's his stuff to deal with. And my stuff is to work on the healing from that. So I chose to invest in different forms of somatic healing modalities like cranial sacral therapy, chiropractic work, acupuncture, and then tapping into like S factor pole dancing to reconnect with my sexuality and my sensuality, especially if you've experienced sexual trauma. That's something that you kind of have to reclaim.
Yeah.
And then when I started getting certified in Pilates, which was my first business at 19, that was where I learned about regulating the nervous system and how Pilates activates the parasympathetic nervous system. And so unconsciously, as I was working through the processes of my own mind, and the other piece of after taking ownership was changing your environment. As I'm sure you've heard, Alex, you cannot heal in the same
Yeah.
environment that made you sick.
No,
So
exactly.
when I moved out of my childhood home, got my own apartment, and then surrounded myself with 10 hours of clients a day with 10 different belief systems, suddenly you're exposed to 10 different belief systems a day, and you're seeing your unconscious mind is picking up, oh my gosh, there are multiple ways to survive in this world. It's no
Yeah.
longer this one paradigm of this one area that I've thought was like how life needed or quote unquote should be. And so when I started to see that, I started to then question, well, if they're surviving or if they're thriving in a marriage or in their body, like, what do they believe? How do they feel? How do they think about things? And I would ask my clients questions. And that's why I love podcasts like yours, Alex, truly, because the stories have the power to literally save lives. Because I had the privilege of listening to my clients' stories as I was kicking their butts, I was learning about different ways to think different ways to interact and have relationships with people. And it was changing my literal wiring in my brain. So by listening to podcasts like this and other podcasts like the Crown Yourself podcast, which is my podcast, and like listening to interviews with other people and other survival stories or other thriving stories or other, challenge to champion stories, it literally is rewiring what is possible as to how you can survive, because our brains are wired to survive, not to thrive. And if we can show different stories of quote unquote survival that are actually thriving, that allows us to change our paradigm and to change our thinking about how what we're thinking about maybe not be the problem. And then if we can change our thinking about the problem, then the perspective around the problem changes, and then the problem actually disappears.
Yeah, I love that. And last question for you, because we got about 4 minutes left. What would you say are some of the, I know bulimia was probably one of the biggest challenges that you've had to overcome, but what were some of the biggest challenges that you've faced as an entrepreneur, and how did you overcome those challenges?
Being deeply in debt, that was definitely one.
Yeah.
Being nearly 100K in debt. Yeah, we had made some investment decisions and then lost a multi-unit property deal. And that was just, that was painful. And so learning self-forgiveness was a huge piece.
Yeah.
And then also understanding that you may have, as an entrepreneur, like I know I certainly had big financial goals. And I was setting those goals at a time where I was not personally developed enough to receive it. And so if you think about it, money is a form of energy. And so as we're thinking of scaling or growing a business, we're thinking of literally allowing our bodies to receive more energy in the flow of money. Well, if your body is not yet regulated and struggling with nervous system regulation, it's like getting hit by lightning. That's why people who win the lottery lose it all very quickly.
It's too much.
And when I first started growing my Crown Yourself coaching business, I was a new mom. I was struggling deeply with some postpartum challenges because of certain things that came up with my son and fears about his health. And that experience really challenged me because simultaneously I was setting this goal of I thought I needed to have $1 million business within 12 months of having a baby. And it nearly broke me, my desire to achieve, because it wasn't actually healthy and it wasn't from a place of groundedness. It was from a place of external, what I thought I should do to be successful.
Right.
And so from that space and from that place, I would actually say if you struggle with setting really lofty goals and then you haven't achieved them multiple years in a row, set smaller goals. Yeah. Set a micro goal. Just say, okay, my goal is to get just one more client. I've, maxed out at, maybe you're used to 5 and then you stretch yourself to just having one more client. Not I'm going to go from 5K months to 100K months, but I'm going to go from 5K. Let me just try getting to 6. Let me just get to 6K. Let me get to 7K. And then, grow set more micro goals to allow your nervous system to adapt. And then as you get used to that adaptability and build literal resilience inside of your nervous system to be able to accept more energy and power in the form of money, then you show up more responsibly, taking more ownership of your money, then that will then allow you to have that transformation of making those really big quantum leaps, but it will come when your nervous system is actually regulated for those goals.
No, I love that, Kim. And that's all the time we have for our podcast today. But where can our listeners find you there on social media and platforms that you're active on?
Yeah, you can always go find me at crownyourself.com. And if you like podcasts like this, you can always subscribe to the Crown Yourself podcast. If you just go to crownyourself.com/podcast, all the links are available there. And if you are looking to leverage podcasting and storytelling to build your business, then you can go to communicationqueens.com.
Absolutely love it. Pleasure to have you on the MindCep Podcast again for part 2, Kim. And I'm sure we're going to do a part 3. And I'm really looking forward to attending your podcasting and prosperity webinar.
Thank you so much, Alex. I'm excited to party down with you at the podcasting.
The MindCep mission. The MindCep's mission is to empower 30+ million listeners worldwide to achieve optimal mental and physical health through engaging podcasts, inspiring positive change for future generations. listeners, I thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to the MindCep Podcast. This is your host, Alex Muir, helping you flex your mind, body, and soul. And I just want to start off by saying I appreciate you. I appreciate you listening to this podcast. I appreciate your feedback on my episodes and following the show. And I would like your feedback as well in the form of a short rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Spotify Podcast now has a rating and review section. So I would love your feedback on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, to help me attract great guests and to help me further the show and develop the show and improve the show. So hopefully you guys all enjoyed this episode. And again, you can reach out to me to give additional feedback on my blog. That's alexandermuir.com/blog. You can reach out to me on through my Instagram, through Facebook. All my links are in the show notes. And again, I appreciate you and thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed that special guest series episode brought to you by RadioGuestlist.com. If you enjoyed this podcast interview with myself and my guests and you'd like to give me some feedback, please do so by leaving a short review on Apple Podcasts under MindCep Podcast. That's MINDCEP, the MindCep Podcast. On Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you listen to podcasts. And I'll be happy to hear your feedback. And if you'd like to connect with me, you can do so as well on social media or on my blog. That's Alexander Muir, ALXANDER, Muir, M as in Mike, UIR.com. And thank you for listening, and see y'all next time.